topics and opinions expressed in the following show are solely those of the hosts and their guests and not those of W4CY Radio, its employees, or affiliates. We make no recommendations or endorsements for radio show programs, services, or products mentioned on air or on our web. No liability, explicit or implied, shall be extended to W4CY Radio or its employees or affiliates. Any questions or comments should be directed to those show hosts. Thank you for choosing W4CY Radio.
Inarticulate speech, inarticulate speech of the heart. Inarticulate speech, inarticulate speech of the heart. Inarticulate speech, inarticulate speech of the heart.
Hello, and welcome to It's Your Voice, the show that hosts enriching conversations in diversity. My name is Bahia Yaksan. I'm a core alignment coach, an emotional wisdom training specialist, and a diversity, equity, inclusion educator and trainer. I have a website if you're interested in seeing my approach to authentic inclusion and how we can make a difference in people's lives and everyone's lives. You can go to my website, which is knowwhatyouvantcoaching.wordpress.com. I also have an Instagram if you want to follow me at It's Your Voice Show. And I am so honored every week to be able to use this platform to hear voices from different fields, different backgrounds, different demographics, and it's all so informative, instructive, inspiring. Don't always talk about easy things because I like to grow and keep learning, and I'm sure my listeners do too. So I appreciate anybody who's listening or viewing today. And my guest has so many stories and so many experiences that it's just been fascinating trying to decide how to nutshell his years and years and years and years and years as an ardent, dynamic, lifelong activist who, he doesn't mind me saying, at the age of 90, has quite a few experiences, insights. He's met some significant people, everyone's significant. I realize he'd be the first one to correct me on that. But some people we know through history, not that we know enough about our own American history, but he knew Dr. Martin Luther King, who worked with Reverend Jesse Jackson and the Rainbow Coalition, had a relationship with Fred Hampton, and has so much to share that I want to just bring him on right now. Pastor George Hrbek, thank you so much for joining me today.
Good to be here, or good to be there with you.
Thank you. I was just sharing with our sound engineer that we did get to meet once. I was very lucky, and you reminded me, I was a teenager at the time, and we met at your sister's house, and I must thank her, Janet Griffin, because she was not only like a major positive influence in my life and helping me get through high school with my parents, and they connected so much because they were all activists. But I've been inviting her to be on this show because she has an amazing story to tell herself, and she kept saying, "You got to talk to my brother. Please talk to my brother, George." And thank you for cooperating. and boy, absolutely great advice on her part.
Well, you know, Janet was named one of the outstanding women in Alabama in the civil rights movement. So you really do need to talk with her also.
Okay, and thanks for
My
telling me
dad
that.
used to always call her the angel, and she really is an angel.
She is. She's incredible, and has raised her own incredible family. And I do like to start with, I love for our viewers and listeners to hear a little bit about your family of origin, like the ethnic identity, the the values you grew up with, how your family influenced you, and how you might have perhaps rebelled against them at some point.
Yeah, my grandparents on both sides all came from Bohemia, which is now Czechia. And they came in the 1890s. And my parents were the first born in this country. And so I was very much part of this, not only my immediate family with my mom and dad and my two sisters and brother, but we had this extended family whose origins were in Bohemia. And to have that relationship with my grandparents and even two of my great grandfathers.
Wow.
And all my aunts and uncles and cousins, and we gather every Sunday at my one grandmother's house, and we get all this great Czech food. She was a wonderful cook, and we had always had a great time. And I appreciated really being rooted in that Czech history and in that Czech immigrant community. It meant a lot to me. I came from a very progressive family. My parents were, and by the way, this was in New Jersey. I was born in New York City, but the time I'm talking about with the extended family, we had moved over to the other side of the Hudson River in New Jersey. And my parents were very progressive. They were really committed to Franklin Delano Roosevelt and the New Deal. And all of my grandparents and uncles and aunts, they were all very politically progressive. In fact, my dad's dad was a Marxist. And on Sundays at Grandma's house, I'd listen to the men engaged in these passionate political discussions. And they'd be talking about the plight of blacks in the country. And they'd also talk about the plight of the miners and the movement, the union movement under John L. Lewis. And I was always fascinated with those discussions. And they had a tremendous impact on me. My dad, when I was 4.5 years old, he was an architect. And at the age of 30, he was engaged by Franklin Delano Roosevelt with 3 other architects to work on the development of a center for young people who had polio in Warm Springs, Georgia. He had bought this town because it had these warm springs, these hot springs. And it was free. It was a residential therapy center for young people with polio, and they could come and stay for free. And he financed that by establishing the March of Dimes, which still exists today. So those were heady days for my parents. And I have vivid memories of that, and that was my first exposure to the realities of Jim Crow. I remember I was just about 5 years old, and Warm Springs had no paved streets, and it had these plank sidewalks in the downtown. And I noticed that we'd walk along the plank sidewalks, and if there was a black person coming the other way, they had to step off until we went by. And I was really puzzled by that, and I asked my dad about it, and that was the first lesson I got, education about the reality of Jim Crow, slavery, and so on. And my dad really spent some time with me attempting to explain what the reality was in a way that perhaps a 5-year-old could at least begin to grasp. So that was my first exposure to the reality of racism, institutionalized racism in this country. So I really came from a very progressive family with great values. They were agnostics or atheists because my great grandfather had been excommunicated from the Roman Catholic Church in Bohemia, which is the reason he had to leave and come to this country because employment was no longer a reality for him over there. And so that experience really meant that my family, my extended family, my parents were really intellectually and emotionally anti-institutionalized religion. But they had great values. We had a wonderful family life, loving family, and I count it as a gift to have been raised in that environment with that wonderful family, with wonderful parents and an extended family. Did I rebel?
What a gift. Oh, wait. Oh, and one of the many, many, many things written about you, it stated that maybe your turn to the ministry was a form of rebellion. Would you agree with that?
No. No, my dad would always insist that we had to sit around after, we always ate the evening meal together, and we had to stay for a half hour after we finished eating, talking about current events, literature, whatever it was. We had to have a discussion every night. I kind of hated that because I wanted to be out playing stickball or something.
Yeah.
But one time, my dad started talking about religion, and I thought this was my opportunity. And I said to him, I said, Dad, I can't have any kind of intelligent discussion with you on this subject. I know nothing about it. I've never been even inside any kind of religious institution. And as soon as I said that, I knew I made a mistake because my dad said immediately, he said, "You're right." So he said, for the next 8 Sundays, I don't know why he picked 8, I'm going to take you to a different church.
Wow.
And for the next 8 Sundays, we did that. We went to a Dutch Reformed church, Baptist church, Presbyterian, Methodist, etc. And this one Sunday, we walked into a small, a rather small Lutheran church, and the guy who came out in all these vestments and so on was young, and I knew him from the streets. And I had absolutely no idea that he was a pastor. But he was one of these guys who hung in with us guys, and he used to go into the bars and everything, and he was just a regular person in Levi's and so on. So I was really shocked when I see him come out, and he's the pastor. This was probably his first parish. He was probably 28, 29 years old. And I was fascinated by that. And one of the things I was struggling with at that time, because within my family, we had such affirmation. We were loved, and we were taught to respect ourselves and respect others. But my whole experience then, outside that, in the real world of the school and everything, I experienced something different. It wasn't you had to earn your worth as a human being. And this was in school. You had to prove that you were worth something, and if you made A's, you were worth more than somebody who made C's. And that really confused me. It upset me. And therefore, my encounter with this young guy, this young pastor, kind of spoke to, when I heard him preach, he spoke to that. And in effect, what he said was, there's nobody that can add to your worth, and no one can take away from your worth, because you are created in the image of God. And I was fascinated with that message, so I went back to that church on my own. And he took me under his wing. He became an adult mentor. And when I saw what he was doing, and he was quite a unique person, I said to myself, I think that's what I want to be doing. So that was and my parents were affirmed me in that. And I was baptized then at 15 years old. My parents came to my baptism. And,
Wow.
so it was not really an act of rebellion. It was really, my dad was responsible for taking me
That's
around
so
to these churches.
that's so interesting. What an open mind. When he realized, oh, okay, I didn't intend to not have him educated about religion.
Right.
That's so interesting. Wow, yeah, thanks for
So
the lead into.
it was a rich, wonderful childhood I had.
That's fantastic to hear. I'm George. I would like it if you could stay closer up because when you lean back, we can't see your face because of where your
Well,
knees
I
are.
just thought I'd give people a break.
Thanks for sitting up. Those of us who are watching do want to see you. So there's so many different ways we could start this conversation. I have like 3 questions that came before this interview even started. But one thing that I guess I'll just share something that your sister Janet Griffin shared with me, and to see where you want to go with it. She talked about how she and her husband, when she was pregnant with their second child, were in Selma when the Freedom Riders were coming through, and they actually witnessed some of the beatings and how not even an ambulance would come. There was another way someone badly beaten up was taken care of, and I know that you were involved in the South and in different places and different times. Do you want to start sharing something about some of those key moments and what got you to start really using your voice and your words to
When,
speak for others?
when I was 15 years old and in the middle of my sophomore year in high school, my dad said we were moving. And we were going to move to Birmingham, Alabama, where he was going to go into an architectural partnership with one of the architects that he worked with on Roosevelt's project in Warm Springs, Georgia. And he made arrangements for me in the spring to get out of my sophomore year 2 months early. He made arrangements for me to take all my final examinations for my sophomore year. And then he and I left and drove to Birmingham, Alabama, but we took a month to do that.
Wow.
Because he wanted me to have exposure to the mining communities, to see what it was like in the South. We slept in flea bag hotels. Sometimes we slept by the side of the road. It was a wonderful experience with my father.
Yeah, what an education.
All of me is just leading up to the fact that I did the last 2 years of my high school in Birmingham, Alabama, in a segregated high school. And I hated it. And I got in some difficulty because of that. I took on a history teacher and her interpretation of the Civil War and the reasons for the Civil War and so on. And I got suspended, accepted back, and so on. But my first real encounter was leaving high school and getting on a streetcar, which Birmingham had at that time, because I had a little job in downtown Birmingham. And when I got on the streetcar, every seat was taken. And of course, they had divided seats, colored, white, And so I was standing up, and on the next stop, a white man got on, probably he could have been 40. And he walked back and he made two of the black women get up out of their seat. He moved the sign one seat back, and he sat down and they stood up. And I reacted to that, and I went back and I moved the sign back, and I told him, I said, you've got to give the seat back to the two women. We wound up in an altercation. The streetcar stopped, the police came, I got arrested. And my dad had to come down and get me. They took me downtown to the police headquarters. And my dad had to come and get me. And so that was my first experience. In that experience, my dad was the one that got chewed out for not keeping control of his son.
Mm. Were you still a teenager then?
Pardon me?
Were you still a teenager at that point?
I was 16.
Oh, you were 16. That's
16.
That's rare.
I couldn't wait to get out of high school and get out of Alabama. And I went to college in Indiana, and I played college basketball. And then I went to seminary in St. Louis. And that's just another whole story. But anyway, out of the seminary, I got sent, guess where? To Alabama, Selma, Alabama, to start a white Lutheran church, which I always called Caucasians for Christ. In Selma, there were already two black churches, Lutheran churches, a Lutheran junior college, and a high school. But there was no white Lutheran church. And I was sent down to do that, which was against everything that I really believed in and so on. But there was a woman in Alabama by the name of Rosa Young, black woman who was from Red Bud, Alabama. And she did something that was really unusual for the turn of the century, 1900s. She graduated from high school. And she recognized that there was little opportunity for education for black children out in the rural areas of Alabama and eastern Mississippi and western Georgia. And she was a member of the American AME, the American Episcopal, African Methodist Episcopal Church. But they didn't have the resources. She wanted to do something about establishing one-room schoolhouses out in those rural areas. Just to make a long story short, I had read about her. And as a result of her work, she was told by Booker T. Washington, who's at Tuskegee Institute, to contact the Lutherans in St. Louis. And the Lutherans sent some people to meet with her. Out of that whole thing, to make a very long story short, over 50 one-room schoolhouses were established in eastern Mississippi, southern Alabama, and western Georgia. And eventually this high school was built in Selma, which those one-room schoolhouses feeded into. And then a junior college was added. Her name was Rosa Young. And when I was ordained in Selma, Alabama, on the grounds of a Methodist orphanage in the chapel on their grounds, because it was the only place we could conceivably have an integrated service.
Wow.
And Rosie Young was at that service, and I wanted to meet her. She was already in her late 60s. And afterwards, at the little social I had, I went up to her, introduced myself, and said I would like to meet with her. And she said, okay. And I said, when? She said, how about tomorrow? So the day after my ordination, I met with Rosa Young just off the campus of the junior college. She lived in a very humble a very humble abode.
Mm.
And she was sitting on the front porch waiting for me, had a chair set up for me. And I explained my dilemma to her. And she simply said to me, she said, Pastor George, she said, go ahead and do it.
Meaning, go ahead and start a white Lutheran church?
Go ahead and start a white church. And she said, and at the right time, I will let you know. And I said to her, I said, what do you mean? I don't understand what you're saying. She said, just do it. And at the right time, I'll let you know. So that's what I did. Started a white church. There was an Air Force base, Craig Air Force Base, just outside of Selma. So I started out in the YMCA, set up 15 chairs. We had 9 people gather, and then pretty soon it grew to 50 with a lot of military people from the Air Force Base who were from the north. And then there were some people in Selma, including the head of the IRS office in Dallas County. And we had a congregation, and we eventually built a church. Well, it was a multi-purpose unit. It was a fellowship hall. It was a church, a sanctuary on Sundays, and so on. And my dad was the architect for that church, by the way. And right after the church was dedicated, we were going to have our first service in the church, and I get contacted by Rosie Young. I had maintained contact with her. And she said, now's the right time. And next Sunday morning, in our first regular service in the church, here comes Rosie Young with about 40 black Lutherans.
Excellent.
And we had the first integrated service.
Wow.
So the police were there within 5 minutes, wanting to know what all these ends were doing here. And I invited them to participate with us. And they didn't know what to do because we had a couple of prominent white people from the community. And we had all these Air Force personnel, including some officers, and the police left. So we had this wonderful service, and great fellowship afterwards, social, the usual coffee and donut kind of thing. The next day, all hell broke loose. And the mayor called me, and a couple of the judges called me. I got expelled from the clergy organization, the white clergy organization. And the mayor wanted to know if I was going to let all of these negras into my church. And I simply said, Mayor Heinz, that's not my church. That's a Jesus church. And if you got a problem, you got to take it up with Jesus, not me.
Good answer.
Anyway, prior to that time, I had built somewhat of a reputation because I was working with young people in the community through the Department of Human Services in Dallas County. And I got named one of Alabama's Young Men of the Year. This was all before this integrated service. But I was, I always felt that the integrated service freed me up to really do what I wanted to do for the first time. And
that's great.
But I was a dedicatory speaker for the new YMCA they built. I had this reputation. I got invited to be the speaker at the Alabama Bankers Association at the University of Alabama. I couldn't believe that. And of course, I made my speeches. I could get away with saying some things in the context of those speeches that at least allowed me to give somewhat of a witness to the reality of Jim Crow and inequality in that separate but equal was not true, and so on. But after that, I became a pariah in the community in Selma.
Is that?
Which was a liberating thing for me.
I can imagine. I could feel it when you said like something broke open and you could finally show who you really were and
Right.
find ways to say and more times and places to say what you really thought and what was really the message of Jesus, which makes me recall a letter that you wrote objecting to a speech that a Baptist.
Yeah, while I was there, a Baptist preacher came in from Montgomery. They gathered the whole white high school population at a barbecue at the baseball field there, and the title, the theme of his speech was "Better Dead Than Intermarried,"
Makes you want to throw up.
and that was published. You know, it was publicized on the front page of the Selma Times Journal. And I felt I could not let that stand, so I wrote a letter to the editor, read a long letter, and I delivered it personally to the offices of the newspaper. I wanted to make sure he got it. That evening, there's a knock on the door, and it's Ed Fields, the editor, and he wants to talk with me. And he comes in. And in effect, he said to me, he said, look, he said, I really like you, but if I publish this letter, I fear for you and your family. And, but the outcome of that, I said, I want you to publish the letter. I wrote it, the letter. I want it published. And he put it on the front page of the Selma Times Journal. And there was a response from the White Citizens Council telling me to leave town, that I was a Judas, a communist, and so on. So yeah, that was another experience in Selma.
Was that this experience, and tell me if this is correct, where a cross was burned in your yard?
Yes. Yeah. Right.
And how did your family deal with that?
Well, my children were very young, so they were really not impacted by it at all. And I don't know. I was naive. I say it was a holy naivete. I was young. I was only 28 years old, 29 years old, and so I don't think I was. And my wife wasn't bothered by it, and or at least she didn't appear to be, and never expressed that. And we just kind of, because we felt we had the support of the congregation, of the community of which we were a part, and that I was serving as pastor of, and we did have the support of that community.
Thank God. That
So,
makes so much difference.
but it was a liberating time for me, and even though I hated the fact that I was getting sent back to Alabama out of the seminary, it turned to be one of the most fortuitous experiences that I had.
It definitely sounded like you had an impact in Selma.
It was a really learning experience for me, and the people I had contact with. I was part of the small group that helped establish the first Southern Christian Leadership Conference chapter in Selma, and the four of the blacks who were part of that effort had their homes firebombed. The white Presbyterian minister got fired from his congregation, but I didn't, So anyway, so there was really a whole positive kind of experience for me in Selma, and I said it was a really learning experience for me. I was the whole experience was just a real important experience to me. It shaped my ministry.
And when and how did you come to meet Dr. King?
Well, that wasn't until I was in Chicago.
Okay.
I had been asked, under the auspices of 3 major Lutheran bodies, they asked me to come to Chicago, and they wanted me to set up an anti-racism program. And they said there was a mansion in Hyde Park that was really a Lutheran church, but it was a very small congregation. And they said that if I agreed to serve that small congregation by having services on Sunday morning, we could live in that mansion and we could do the project in that mansion. It was one of the Leopold mansions, if people are familiar with the old Loeb Leopold murder case first, where the issue of capital punishment became a major issue in the country for the first time under the lawyer Clarence Darrow, and some movies were made about that, the Loeb Leopold case. So that's where I landed, and I had this idea that I really, if I was going to do anti-racism, I had to focus on the white community. And I had some ideas about doing that, and there was a professor at the University of Chicago in the religious department. He was a Baptist, and he was one of Dr. King's advisors, and he said to me, look, I can arrange for you to meet with Dr. King. I had met Dr. King, but just met him briefly in Selma when he came one time. So I met with Dr. King as a result of this meeting being set up in the basement of a union hall. And I met with him for an hour and a half. I didn't anticipate meeting with him for that long.
Wow.
But I told him what I was there for and what ideas I had, and he gave me really great feedback. And he affirmed the focus. He thought I ought to really be focusing on the white community. And he told me, don't make this too much of an academic experience. He said, you got to have some way of really communicating with people, dramatizing it, and so on. And he said, you really ought to focus on primarily, not only, but primarily young people, high school, college age. So that was some of the feedback I got Dr. King, and I certainly did not anticipate meeting with him for that long. That was my encounter with Dr. King. He was in Chicago at that time demonstrating in Cicero, and things were really lively in Chicago at that time.
Wow,
So,
sounds like an incredible conversation. And I kind of want to segue into something I read that you wrote. It's just bringing it up, and I definitely appreciate. So, in your insight into working with white people is because we have been the agents of the oppression, the beneficiaries, materially, not spiritually, the privileged beneficiaries and the agents of oppression. So that was your insight about working with white people to get to the hearts and minds of us to recognize what we're doing and what we can do instead of perpetuating the systems
right.
that walked on others' backs.
So that's what we did in the mansion. And I meet with Jesse Jackson and Al Ravey, who was a big community organizer in Chicago, and a couple of other people and myself. We'd meet 3 or 4 times a week in the back room of this cocktail lounge in Hyde Park. And that was a good experience for me too. I felt like George the Least in the company of those others because they were doing things on a much greater scale than I was. But they incorporated me because of what I was doing, working with the white community, and I had established a relationship with Fred Hampton, who was the head of the Black Panther Party in Chicago. I met him when he was in high school, and he made a name for himself because he organized, while he was in high school, demonstrations against the segregated swimming pools in the suburban communities of Chicago, the greater Chicago area. And eventually he became the head of the Panthers, and he and I had established a friendship, and we'd get together. for breakfast or lunch. And then he was responsible then for organizing the Rainbow Coalition. So I got involved with Cha-Cha Jimenez, who was head of the Young Lords, the Latino counterpart of the Black Panthers. And then there were the White Patriots, who were the white counterpart of the Panthers, under Preacher Man Fetterman. He was, in fact, the head of the White Patriots was a pastoral student at the Congregational Seminary in Chicago. So I got involved with those, and they were involved in the Mansion, our program at the Mansion. They became involved to some degree. So anyway, over the time that I was at the Mansion, we probably had over 3,000 people participate in what we were doing. There were people that came in and wanted to become part of it. Pretty soon we had an internal community of people living there and working on this project of about 20, 21, 22 people at any given time. And some seminary students that took out a year and came and stayed there. One of them, and when they'd come in, I'd say to them, well, here's what we're doing. You tell me what you want to do, how you want to add to what we're doing. And one came in and he started a newspaper. We put out a newspaper. Another one wanted to do theater. We set up a theater in the basement of the Mansion, a black box theater. And it was quite an experience. So we had people come in for a 3-day weekend, or people come in for a week long, and we were really dealing with institutionalized racism. And I took the advice of Dr. King, and we dramatized it. And so it wasn't, we weren't lecturing. We dramatized it through parables and had people discuss it, and then we gave them opportunities to have plunges out into the community to see what was going on. Jesse Jackson had his Operation Breadbasket with over 1,000 people every Saturday. And so it was that kind of experience, a lot of reflection. Worship services grew. We had people packing into the Mansion on Sunday mornings, young people sitting on the floor and so on. And we were dramatizing the gospel readings and writing our own music, and so it was quite an experience. And then some of the dogmatic leaders in the church decided that what I was doing was not appropriately in keeping with Lutheran dogma. And they cut off the support. And I got charged with heresy.
Interesting.
And,
You actually got charged with heresy.
Yeah, but we kept the Mansion thing going. I got a job loading trucks on the graveyard shift.
Well,
and I had a young man who came to do his pastoral student from Iowa, came to do his internship with me, and he became my successor there.
Great. So the work carried on. I do want to note
the work carried on for a little over more than 2 years. And then I got an invitation. Yeah. Well, the heresy trial was just another experience. I was meeting with the council, which consisted of 32 men, no women, men, either in suits or collars, except in that group of 32, 31 were white and one was black, and he was a police commander. And they gave me 15 questions to answer, and my sadistic nature said I was going to tell them I wanted to answer all 15 questions without interruption, and I made them sit there for 2.5 hours while I
Wow.
laid it all out there where I was at and so on. And the questions were, are you a member of the Communist Party?
Wow.
You know, do you believe that that Jonah was a historical person? There were just all these questions.
Wow.
Anyway, after I got through presenting, this black police commander stands up and he says, I've been looking for somebody like you in the church all my life.
Wow.
Took the wind out, or the claws, it declawed the whole group. So they didn't find me guilty, but they did determine that I was persona non grata in the church, and they were not going to foist me on a congregation or anything like that. So, but I got reprieved because I got an invitation to go to Germany.
Well, let me tell you that we have about 3.5 minutes left. There's so much
Oh,
more.
is that all? Has it been that? I've been talking too much.
Oh, no, it's all great. I just wanted to see if I could ask you a couple of the questions that
Sure.
came in. And then I also want to ask you about something that you wrote. But the questions are, I'll just try to blend them. They're about the times, but I also want to really get back to your message. So I'll just ask this quickly, and then I want to go back to something you wrote previously. Basically, if the type about the current times, because you have lived through so many tumultuous stages, and the things that you face as an ally standing up, truly use your voice without hesitation, just following your voice. And anyway, just people asking for advice about what to do when there seems to be so much, like perhaps there's been these things happen periodically of polarization, but now it just seems so amplified because of social media. All the divisions and the hatred seems to be amplified all over the world. Anyway, so that the questions, I'm trying to blend them very quickly, or about like, one person asked, any advice you have about how do we help generate more love and counter that. And another question was, how do you want to make a guess as what Dr. King would say, what we should do to help unify people?
Well, the first thing I would say, and this needs to be said emphatically, that I could talk about the things that I was involved in, but I was never involved in any of that alone. Never alone. Always in community. Always in community. So, and which I think is so important. That unless we're part of a community in which we really, there's a mutual understanding, a mutual respect, a mutual trust, a group within which we feel free to be able to express ourselves and to discover collectively what the common wisdom is, and what we need to be doing together. So it's anything that I've been involved in, it's never been a lone wolf.
That's great to hear.
It's with people. So that holds true right now in our present time. You can't be a lone wolf in this. You might be able to take, in some cases, an individual stand and and share with somebody and be honest about it, and expect expect maybe the kind of feedback you don't want. But to be able to do that even as part of a community makes a world of difference.
Thank you.
And that's the most important thing I would have to share with anybody. You never should be. You can't be acting alone. You have to be part of a beloved community, I would call it, that Martin Luther King talked about.
Right, part of a beloved community. Wow. Okay. Well, let me just thank you so much. I just wanted the message I wanted to refer to, you just reiterated in a different way when you were advising people to spend time in community and to be with one another, and encourage people to listen to each other and uplift each other and remind each other of our people's resourcefulness, and to not tell people what to do, but to support
Absolutely.
people. support people in, figuring out their own gifts and wisdom and talent, and that
That's
their
a
own
good,
power and
that's
shape.
a good summary.
And to support people in shaping their futures.
To be able
Well,
to
thank you.
listen to each other, to hear each other, we have so much to learn from each other.
Still so much. I'm grateful to you. I'm sorry the ending is rushed here. Fantastic hearing some of your stories. We want to hear more, but I think we have to say goodnight now. And I want to say thank you to our sound engineer and to our producer, Dean, and to all the listeners and viewers. And please be sure to tune in next Wednesday at 8 p.m. on to It's Your Voice on Talk 4 TV or W4CY.com radio. And may we all have enriching conversations and diversity this week.
It's good to connect with you after all these decades.
I'm grateful. Thank you.
Inarticulate speech of the heart.